For young biologists, I would say a few things. Just go out there. Go out there in nature, in whatever foreign nature is appealing to you. Could be water, could be land, could be mountains, could be deserts, could be the rainforest. Just connect with nature as much as possible. Your best ideas come up when you're out there. The most interesting questions, and my colleagues that have children, they frequently tell me I bring my kids to the field to do a little hike out there, and those questions are really good. Their questions tend to be really good. So advice, go out there, keep your eyes and ears open for those things. And then in the process of doing science, remember that, on the day-to-day, how does your day-to-day of a scientist would look, and follow that career path.
My guest today is Dr. Ignacio Escalante Meza, assistant professor in the biological sciences here at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, Paul, thanks for having me, and I'm excited for this chat.
Yes, so let's start with Harvestmen, or more commonly known as daddy longlegs. I think a lot of people may assume that daddy longlegs are spiders, but in fact they're not. Can you explain why they are not spiders?
Yes, so they're a different group within arachnids. So arachnids is a class of arthropods composed of 11 different orders, spiders being one of them. You have scorpions, mites, and acari have two different orders. And then the order called Opiliones is where daddy longlegs and the rest of the harvestmen are located. It's an order of 7,000 species described worldwide currently. Broadly, they are not spiders because they don't have venom or silk, and their body is just one body segment, as opposed to two body segments. You know that spiders have cephalothorax or head and thorax and abdomen like an ape, whereas Opiliones have just one body segment. They fuse all those segments together. They have a few other modifications in their morphology, and something that makes them very unique is the presence of a gland that opens here somehow in their shoulders that they use to secrete repugnatory secretions and chemicals to avoid predations mostly.
So if they don't spin webs, how do they catch their food? What do they eat?
They're omnivorous, so they can eat a very wide diversity of prey items or of food items. So they can hunt for living prey, they scavenge for dead prey, but they also rely heavily on plant and fungi material as food sources. So we see them eating rotten fruit very commonly. I see them eating nectar, feeding also on fungi, and a few other plant material sources out there. So when you're out there seeing them, it's a wide diversity of things they eat. How they catch it, they just dive into it. We don't really know how they can catch, for example, ants or flies or moths, but we think that they dive all over them and catch them and start eating like pieces of prey. So since they're omnivorous, it's convenient to keep them in the lab for whenever we do those short-term behavioral studies, but that also makes them a very interesting group because that means that they contribute to a lot of nutrient cycling in the environment. So they participate heavily eating a wide diversity of food items, so they contribute to nitrogen, carbon, and other mineral cycles.
Now, one of the things you look at is locomotion within the harvestman. So what would happen if the harvestman loses part of a leg?
They typically lose a whole leg because they voluntarily detach them from the base of the leg, somehow here in a segment called the coxa. It's not uncommon, that's a good point. It's not uncommon to find them missing part of their legs. We consider that they are walking around we assume that they are moving around, touching, feeling the environment because they rely mostly on contact chemoreception. So it means like their legs are covered in noses and tongues, or the equivalent of what we have. I would say it would be very detrimental for the locomotion because we know that if they lose a full leg, they can readjust their kinematics. But if they lose part of the legs, they will be at a certain disadvantage, and I'm inclined to think that they would eventually release that legs on their own.
So if a predator were to latch onto one of the legs, the harvestman would release at the body versus where the predator would grab it?
Yeah, we call it the breakage plane, and that's every animal that has the ability to voluntarily lose parts of their body. It will have some building design for that, and in this case, it's in the segment, in the basal segment. So whatever, regardless of where throughout their legs the stimuli, the pulling or the holding will be coming from, they will likely release them at the very base.
Because they don't have eyes, right? They can't see.
They do have eyes.
Do?
Most of them have two eyes in this little mount on the dorsal side of their body called the ocularium, but their resolution is not very developed. So we say they can sense whether it's day and night. They can sense if you wave your hand above them, they will see that, but they don't have the ability to recognize textures and movements or colors. So they rely mostly on their contact chemoreceptor structures, and I think they use vision as a secondary supporting visual communication modality.
And so do they use the front legs for, are there different purposes for each of the leg pairs then?
Yeah, we typically call it, they have 8 legs, 4 pairs, and legs number 1, 3, and 4 are what we call the locomotor legs. So they move with an alternated tripod gait. So they have 3 legs on the ground at a given time, and the other 3 are in the air. And the leg number 2 is what we call the antenniform or sensory legs. It's secondarily modified. It's longer. It has many pseudo appendages, and that allows them to sense the environment. So as for like different functions, that's the most broad way we can sort these legs. Now, in the locomotor legs, the front legs are what we call the leading eggs, and that's standard nomenclature in comparative biomechanics, that the legs in the front are the ones sort of like leading where the legs are, and then leg number 1 is here, and then leg number 3 meets where leg number 1 was, and that's how they know how to move forward.
So if they were to lose a leg, is there a leg that would be more detrimental to their survival than losing, say, number 4 versus number 1?
I would say more than which leg, we have information for how many legs will be detrimental. So losing 2 or 3 is more detrimental for their short-term locomotion and energetics, as well as losing 2 legs on the same side compared to losing 2 legs but 1 on each side. It's more detrimental to lose 2 on the same side because that disrupts their alternating gait. In terms of a specific pair, I've been hypothesizing for a while that losing sensory legs could have very important implications in how they find food, in how they defend themselves, how they sense for predators. But we don't have any information right now to back up those claims. So it's just ideas up in the air. So I would say that could be a big cost. And the leg number 1, because we know that those are the legs that are more play a bigger role in leading their locomotion.
Has anyone looked at reproductive success in terms of individuals that have all their legs versus missing 1 or 2 or 3?
We have looked at it. We have looked at the effects of leg loss in reproduction very briefly. I did a project some time ago in which we induced males to experimentally lose legs, and we induced them to mate in these sort of mating arenas. And males that have lost legs, 2 legs, were as likely to perform those behaviors associated with courtship, suggesting that losing legs do not impede them or do not deter them from engaging in those behaviors, and their mating success was similar. So even though these animals, when they are mating and reproducing, there's a lot of behaviors that are involved with their legs, leg tapping. Even in local species here in the Illinois area, in another genus, there's a lot of leg wrapping. Males wrap their legs around the female legs, and those behaviors are crucial to succeed, to ensure their success. So that's why initially we thought if they lose legs, there will be some cause. But as far as we know, in the ways that we have tested, it seems that there's no long-term cause in the reproduction, which is interesting because it's a very common defensive strategy, and the fact that it doesn't have reproductive cause, or at least not big apparent reproductive cause, might suggest why throughout sexual selection this has not been selected against.
Mm-hmm. And could you talk a little bit about how the courtship between the Harvestmen, males and females coming together for mating, is there a courtship procedure?
There's a few stages of behavioral interactions. Whenever they found themselves, I'll back up a little bit. The species that I know from tropical regions, they are roosting either in solitary or in aggregations during the day. At sunset, they just come out and go down the tree, and they move around the foliage and the leaf litter, and eventually they find themselves. How do they find themselves? We don't know. How do they recognize which species is which? We don't know. But once they do, there's a lot of interactions of leg tapping. They tap each other, and the male will be tapping and sort of trying to position itself in a situation in which they are looking at each other like front to front. Eventually, throughout all those stages, the female will potentially move away, who has the ability to have a posture in which she prevents the progress of the interaction. But if it doesn't, eventually they engage their pedipalps. So their pedipalps are like their mouth parts here, not their fangs, but they also have an appendage in which they handle food with. And they engage them, they hook them, and eventually they reproduce. Yeah. So there's a few stages, a lot of leg tapping, leg wrapping, and eventually they mate. Some species in a different group, in a different family in South America, they engage in parental care. They guard the mate, so they stop mating, but the male or the female stays around until oviposition happens. Sometimes the male takes care of the clutch of eggs, and so on. There's a whole variation in reproductive strategies. I haven't done much research besides the one I mentioned, but down in South America, there's a fantastic group, and there's a fantastic diversity in their reproduction.
Do they do anything with nuptial gifts or no?
They do, yes.
Some species?
The long-legged ones in the family Sclerosomatidae, we know for some species out here in North America, in the genus Liobunum, that they have nuptial gifts in the sense that the males produce some sugary secretion that they present to the females during the last stages of courtship. Now, what this does is that it ensures that the female gets this reward, that the female stays there, and while the female is consuming this allows, and this is classic sexual selection theory, by having this gift as an offering, as a distraction as well, allows males to have more sperm transfer and secure paternity along those lines.
Do we have any theories as to why they evolved to have such long legs?
That is a great question. Yes and not fully, not anything that has been formally tested. But the body plan, this morphological design of a small body or relatively small body with very long appendages, is somehow common across arachnids, in opiliones, in spiders, pycnogonids, the sea spiders have that design. Some forms of centipedes have it, tipulid flies, so that's somehow common. At least for animals that move on land, the working ideas is that this design allows them to navigate a more three-dimensionally complex environment. So since they have longer legs, they're easy to move around, and a little seedling or a leaf litter, a piece of dead leaf or a seed, is less of an obstacle that it would be for like a more robust short leg arthropod moving around. Gives them more of an ability to move around three-dimensionally complex environments, gives them a greater area of influence. And since they're touching around, longer legs allow them to touch around, potentially sensing predators early or sensing food sources at a greater distance as well.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? You had mentioned that gland that they have. So is that solely used to evade predators, or how does that exactly work?
Yeah, so it's they have a gland, and it opens the gland opening is called the ossopore, and typically across groups of opiliones, once they get stressed or handled or grabbed by a predator and so on by their body, what they do is they immediately eject some secretions. So this could be a combination of very diverse array of chemical compounds, alkanes, acids, alkenes as well. We've done some studies on what the composition is there, but typically we know that it functions as a repugnatory secretion, and some vertebrate systems, frogs and birds have been recorded to react and let them go once they release those chemicals. It's a strong volatile secretion, so you smell it, and when we're studying them, and then eventually you develop this smell, your ability to sense that there are these animals doing this around. So when we go out to the field with students, one of the things that we do is that, smell this. One of the weird things that could happen in the field is that you get to smell this secretion and try to describe those chemicals. So it's a repugnatory function. It also functions as an alarm because in certain species in South America, actually, when there's aggregated animals and you present this secretion, they will move away. They will leave. So the fact that these animals are ejecting these chemicals might induce them as well to might signal that there's a potential danger from which they should move away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's a secretion. It's not ejected outwards then. Or
yes, it's a secretion. So typically, it's not ejected the way a bombardier beetle will eject or jet something out. What you see in practical terms is that it forms like a little drop on their shoulder. It's usually milky, mustardy looking. It's highly variable across species. In this type of species, the sclerosomatids, what you see is just a little drop on their shoulder. You start smelling it. And in other species, what it does is that it coats sort of like the exterior. So sometimes they have ridges along their body, so it creates like a little coating with that.
Oh, right. So it'll follow the ridge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they fight with their legs at all, either in between species or males within the species?
In these long-legged ones, we haven't seen much fighting. In some other species, they do. In some species, the males, they have spines that the assumption is that they fight with, some behavioral observations of those. But in this group of animals that we study, what we've seen very recently is that a male will bite another male's leg and they start like moving around, like vibrating it in a movement that we call bobbing, that it just like disappears, kind of like creates this little cloud of legs moving around. So we think it's in the context of reproduction, males sort of like trying to prevent other males from accessing a nearby female, and this is something we've looked around.
But in that specific case you just mentioned there, then the male that was biting the other male's leg, they wouldn't release that leg then? Or
we don't know. It could. That's a very good point. Yeah, it could do it, especially if the male wants to move away, continue potentially looking for a female, and going back to the fact that it might not affect the reproduction, so might as well release it and move away. These are just a few observations that this summer, a few months ago, we started noticing out here in local species.
What other things regarding the biomechanics of Harvestmen are you currently looking at?
We want to look at the function of this bobbing behavior. The bobbing behavior is they do this up and down rapid movement in which they will do it standing still or while moving away. So we're interested in, we know how they do it because a few years ago we studied the biomechanics and how the body, the center of mass oscillates in 2 cycles, twice per cycle. And now we want to understand the why of that. Why a behavior that seems energetically costly, it could be also conspicuous for animals that are using vision to see them because they could see that movement. We want to understand what is the function of that behavior, particularly in the context of escaping predators. So we want to see if animals moving, if we can develop some passive and active robotic models that could actually make that movement. If those models in fact disrupt the visual image of predators, and if that behavior somehow prevents animals from being attacked or grabbed by the myriad of potential predators that they have.
So we don't know exactly why they do the bobbing. Is the bobbing just straight up and down or side to side?
The body itself goes up and down, and then since that's being created by leg construction, you see the body moving up and down, but also goes sideways in like both degrees of freedom. So it's a whole range of motion that takes a little bit to figure out, yeah.
And this is for both sexes do this then?
Yes, as far as we know, and I do have to say that we haven't looked at this very closely. As far as we know, we see males and females doing this. The observation of males fighting and bobbing that we did recently, that was in the context of males. But in other species that we know from tropical regions, we do know that both sexes engage in this.
And this is common across many different species of Harvestmen.
It is common across it's common across many species of Harvestmen. Their general morphology is not too different. What usually varies is how long their legs are, how wide or narrow their body is, but their overall body plan is similar, and that suggests that their behaviors are somehow conserved as well. And we do have observations of how similar those are. Now, that said, we don't have any rigorous data, but there is some variation. Some species will be more likely to engage in movement in this bobbing behavior than others.
And do you think there's still more species yet to be identified when it comes to Harvestmen?
Yes, there is. This is a very challenging group taxonomically and systematically. We don't really know the identity of many of those. So there is one big genus of hundreds of species. It is currently in this, they're all together in this genus called Prionostima from tropical regions, so all the way from the Sonora Desert in northern Mexico all the way to the Amazon basin, and is, by information on their biogeography, seems a little unlikely that the same genus is all over the place. A lot of the species that I work with from Costa Rica, we have not formally described them. We know they're different species because their genitalia is different. We've seen the different life stages, but there's more work to be done with that. There's some people studying this, and every time someone creates a phylogeny with genomic or genetic information, we see that it's still unresolved, and there's still a lot of work to do. For historical reasons, that we don't know much about their species diversity, and there's still a lot to do. Yeah, still one of the arthropod groups that, even though they're not very specious, we still do not know all the details in their systematics and taxonomy.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that people have of insects and arachnids?
That they are harmful. We tend to be afraid of animals that don't have eyes and a mouth the same way that we have them, or some other mammals. So one of the main misconceptions, I think, and when I do this work, when I talk with people, what we hear is that questions of how they can harm us. A particular study in arachnids, spider venom, there's a whole misconception even in the medical field. There's a lot of discontent of disconnection. There is a lot of disconnection in what the actual harm of these animals are. For spider species, out of 50,000 currently described species, less than 20 have been found to be of medical concern that produce some kind of harm to humans. So I think there's a lot of how we as humans perceive other animals, and it has a lot of long legs, it moves around in the dark, it doesn't have a face, it's hairy. So there's not a lot of love out there, and we play that in our favor because a lot of our outreach and community engagement and education that we do with these animals is just tell them, well, they're out there, you've seen them, there's a lot we can learn from them, they're good for the environment, and they're not gonna harm us. Yeah.
How many species are found here in the Midwest in the United States? Do you know, roughly?
Roughly, I would say around 30, maybe, of these long-legged ones. In this area here in northeastern Illinois, we've been gathering some information in the Field Museum collection, in iNaturalist platform, in a project in iNaturalist, and around 11 species of Leiobunum are present. One species that is a non-native species, Phalangium opilio, that is from Central Europe, that is very common in parks and other sort of like man-managed areas. And there's another species in more natural areas in that same family. So it would be Leiobunum, Phalangium, Odelius. And then there's a few species that I'm not very familiar with because there's another group, the Disnoi suborder, that are mostly found in leaf litter or on the ground, on the rocks and in trunks and crevices. They have short legs, so I'm not very familiar with that species. Mm-hmm. But I would say roughly 30, 40 species, but still a lot to discover.
By comparison, how many would you find in Costa Rica then?
Yeah, in Costa Rica we have maybe 50% more. Mm-hmm. Not a lot, not a tremendously diverse group, which is very interesting. A lot of arachnid groups are not very diverse, including Opiliones. But in tropical regions, it's variable across latitudinal gradients, and the hotspot of diversity of these groups for some of these groups is in the Atlantic forest in Brazil. Once you move towards those latitudes, you can find 70, 100 species of these animals.
Yeah. So one of the other species you look at are tree hoppers. Could you, maybe let's start, I guess, with what is a tree hopper?
Yeah, tree hopper, they're insects in the family Membracidae. They are, it's a fantastic group of animals. They have a host plant, so they develop female layer eggs in just one species of plant. That they have a very unique relationship with that one species of plant. Female lay the eggs on that species of plant. The larva develops there, and the juvenile stages emerge, and they stay there. They can form aggregations when they're young of different species, and even when they're adults. So they stay there. They feed from phloem of the plant, so they pierce the stems, and they feed from that phloem, from those sugary secretions, and they stay in that plant for most of their life. And when they're adults, they can fly away to other plants, and eventually what they want to do is end up in plants of that same species, which is very interesting. Part of the reason why they have this relationship with these plants is because they communicate with substrate-borne vibrations. So they produce vibrations through their bodies that transmit through the plant, and those are very species-specific, context-specific. Males produce songs that they are used by females and interpreted, and females respond. They engage in these duetting relationships, and eventually they mate, and the whole cycle starts all over again.
So do we have any idea how many songs that, there are multiple songs that each species uses then?
Yes, so there's a somehow very specific courtship bout that males do. And in a given species, the male will produce different sort of elements in a given sequence with a very highly selected frequency of propagation throughout the substrate, and the female responds. So in the context of reproduction, males produce one signal in a different bout, so they can produce that same signal in groups of 4, 5, or 6 times. Female respond, and that's sort of like the classic framework of this. Part of the work that I did was just listening to a lot of these recordings and seeing that there were potentially other type of songs, of elements produced in different contexts that might function for different reasons. Some of them, and some research recently has shown that they could use other vibrations, they can produce other vibratory elements in the context of responding to wind moving around. Potentially also the nymphs also produce these vibrations to sort of like call the female because there might be some danger around, predatory avoidance, this type of thing. So they're very context specific, and the more you listen, the more you'll find that the signaling repertoire of this type of animals is huge, and this is classic. In the last 20 years, for any unusual group of arthropods or understudy group of arthropods, you put a laser vibrometer, and then you will see that they respond with some vibration. So we're still getting to know more of the sensory modalities and how diverse and widespread they are across the animal kingdom. 20 years ago, people didn't know that jumping spiders have songs that they produce through vibration. Same with wolf spiders, crickets, and the list goes on. Yeah.
So are the females selecting males to reproduce with based off of the song alone?
I think so. Yeah, my recollection is that the frequency, the fundamental frequency of the songs is of high importance for females. also the timing, so fit different spectral and timing traits of their signaling display is of high importance in these females. Yeah, how long they can sing for, what's the time frame between different signals, between different bouts, and so on.
So she's judging the fitness of the prospective mate.
That's the assumption, that the stamina, the condition of the male also allow them to continue producing these robust and vibrant displays of sound. So that's the proxy for the value of the male. From there, interpreting if that means that the sperm will sire more offspring. Those are other connections that I'm not entirely sure that they have been made.
Mm-hmm. What's the weirdest thing you've seen one of either a harvestman or tree hopper or other? What's the weirdest or oddest thing you've seen in the field one of these species do or exhibit?
You do see a lot of weird things of these animals doing. The reproduction itself in Opiliones is very interesting. Something very weird that I see or it draws my attention is seeing Opiliones eating. What are they eating and how they capture an ant. How they can grab an earthworm and tear it to pieces, and you see an Opilion moving around carrying like a sausage hanging from its mouth and doing that. Yeah. Another weird thing another thing we can call weird of these animals is that in the process of studying their locomotion and the effect of losing legs in their velocity, I just set up a camera and recorded how they move, and I wanted to record them running away, and eventually it was going fine. And then more videos I was seeing, they started moving differently, and this is how I describe the bobbing behavior. And they could do also other type of gaits in which, for example, something that we call stutting, that they were just like bouncing around like gazelles do while escaping being hunted by tigers, by lions. And they were doing so the fact that they have a whole repertoire of locomotor gaits was very unusual, kind of unexpected. But I guess once you put a camera or a microphone in an animal, anything goes.
Yeah. But the legs don't regrow once they lose them.
They do not regenerate their legs after they lose them, and that's very unique of Opiliones, because even though they would lose them while they were young. So spiders and other arthropods and insects, if they lose their legs in early stages of development, in early instars, they will regrow them to a certain degree. Sometimes you see a spider with a leg that looks a little different, little odd, maybe shorter, is because it loses it earlier in development. But Opiliones don't. And when I was a PhD student, I said I want to study what are the short and long-term consequences, both in movement, physiology, and in fitness. And all the type of experiments that I did, I found no effect. And I was thinking, well, the assumption is that they have legs, they must need them, and losing them will be very detrimental. And locomotion, they're fine, they recover. Survival doesn't seem to affect them. Reproduction, as I said earlier, they're fine. So my interpretation of this animal went from like they must regrow their legs, but somehow they can't, to now I don't think they are necessarily that interested, evolutionarily speaking. The necessity to not lose legs or to keep all of them have not been selected.
How many joints are in each leg then? Or does it differ across species?
It's conserved across species. It should be 4 or 5 different joints. But these ones, the ones that have long legs, so that would be, they have long legs because their last segment, the tarsus, is secondarily enlarged with a bunch of like pseudo tarsi, zero segments, and so on. So that same design is somehow conserved. The body plan has the same type of segments across all arachnids, even in their pedipalp, which are these short appendages around their mouth. They will have a similar, at least, design. Yeah.
How difficult would it be to create a prosthetic leg for an Opiliones?
It might be very difficult. The attachment, I haven't thought much about this. It's an interesting point. Yeah, when they lose legs, immediately they undergo all this process of trying to understand what's happening. We don't know neurally what's happening, the neural connections, cognitive wise, we don't know what's happening. We certainly see them kind of pausing more and so on. So there might be the possibility of creating something. But yeah, these are very thin legs. It's a very interesting sort of like morphological construction that they have thin legs, but you can grab them and they are stiff enough to be held and so on. So hard to tell at this point, I think. Yeah.
But with the two front legs, they can actually grab something and pick something up then.
Yeah, with their mouth parts, the pedipalps, they grab something, and sometimes you see them handling the food with those. Yeah, and then one other thing that you see them frequently doing is grooming their legs. So they grab them and they put them in their chelicera and they groom them, kind of like what cats do somehow. And you know, since they are sensing their environment with their legs, they're gathering dirt and other detritus and pieces of whatever that is, water and so on. So they do take good care of those.
And they're able to pick up vibrations through the legs as well?
They would, yes. So let me think. Behaviorally, we see them reacting to vibrations in substrate. So they would, yeah. And they have sensory structures, setae, slits, pores, and a bunch of a myriad of sensory structures. And one or more of those will be able to sense those like type of movements in the substrate. Yes.
What's one thing that you think you've learned from either Opiliones or tree hoppers that has that could inform something about humans?
I think
if there is anything. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
I think along the way, I've learned many things of how we feel about the natural world. I mean, even I did not grow up seeing bugs. I'm not the one that, you know, those scientists that grew up catching bugs and playing with them in the summer. It wasn't me, so I got to know these animals later in life from a more like academic perspective of like how can we understand animals and what they do and so on. So along the way I've learned how people feel about the natural world, and then talking with people, how much experience they have, how they perceive them and so on. So that could be part of the answer. In the process of studying their biomechanics, there's a lot of interest in understanding how animals move and how animals react to adverse conditions, changing morphological design and so on. There's a lot of interest from a robotics perspective, how we can inform robotic design based on what animals do. What happens when these animals lose a leg, how they can compensate. Well, the way they compensate is that they change how high their body is from the ground, or how long their steps are. So people engineers, roboticists, and people in this type of mechanical engineer departments are interested in using that knowledge from animals to inform the design of robotics and robots that can be used for understanding nature, but robots that are used in rescue and just understanding how, I guess people are interested in how we make more human-like robots that respond to changes in the environment. Another component that people are interested in using knowledge in animal movement is the design of prosthetic devices and other sort of like biomedical infrastructure. But those are sort of like the implications that we talk about, and eventually my papers get cited in robotics papers from engineers. I'm like, whoa, didn't know this was gonna be a thing, but I'm happy it is. And now that part of the lab is studying their chemical secretions, that plays a role also in biological control, in the type of products that animals have, in how then people in agriculture are interested in like what are the toxins or compounds that animals are using and how can that play a role in agriculture. So a lot of a common story is we do basic research to understand the natural world, and from there many implications that we either anticipated will happen or had no idea that we can take in that direction. Some of those come up every now and then.
So what first drew you to Opiliones or tree hoppers?
Professors as academics, mentors, and former professors have had a huge impact in me positively. When I was in college, I was interested in understanding how things work. And then that drew me to try to understand behavior in the field, and I guess I've always been interested in understanding what animals are doing out there in response to their environment. And when I was finishing undergrad, the professor that taught the evolution behavior classes did his career in studying the systematics and evolution of behaviors in spiders. In spiders, I took his class. That included some research component, and I did a research project with spiders at the time. I did my master's project studying how spiders learn how to eat with experience, and that was it. And then in a moment, I grew up academically in Costa Rica, where funding is limited and we get very creative. We call it Ciencia Latina, any type of device that we can create. So I did my master's work with plastic shot glasses and rubber bands, and studying arthropods that are not only very abundant, but is also very convenient and affordable to have very controlled experiments out there.
So your interest in science biology didn't really start till you got to college then?
Yes, I guess I was always interested in how things work, in building things. My parents were like, oh, you could be an engineer. I'm like, oh, maybe. And then continuing the conversation with professors, my biology teacher in high school took us to field trips. I have been super fortunate, and the fact that I grew up in such a great country as Costa Rica that has so many different environments, so close to this main city, we were taking field trips. And I guess approaching senior year in high school, I was like, wait, hold on. I can do science outdoors, and I guess biology is what I'll do. Yeah.
Well, staying on the engineering front then, could we talk a little bit about the pit traps or antlion?
Antlion, yeah. Yeah, because it's like the lion of the ants that eat the antlion. Also a fantastic group of arthropods that I got to study, and I got to be involved in research by random reasons. So I also participate in a field class for Latin American students in Costa Rica, and another professor brought this study system. Antlions create these pit traps of 1/2 inch in diameter roughly, and they dig it like in spiral going down, and they sit at the bottom of it with their mouth parts open, just waiting for prey that is walking around to fall. It's typically ants, but also beetles, collembola, and a few other things. So I've been fortunate also that I get to be involved in projects that try to study their behavior, and also sort of like material sciences, and we got to play with sand a lot doing this work. Yeah.
Do we know, has anyone studied like the actual pitch of the pit traps? Are they always like a certain number of degrees in pitch, or do we know?
We know a little bit, and it's an interesting balance of how steep, and they call it the angle of repose in material science in this literature. It has to be steep enough for prey to fall down and not be able to climb up, but it cannot be super steep that it would provide like a landslide or a sandslide or the collapse of the trap. So it's a very fine balance. We did a project in which we modify the type of soil that we give them, because if you give them sand that is dry, they will be the trap. So we got a cubic meter of construction sand, we sieved it, and we had fine sand and fine soil and coarse soil. We mixed it around, and we saw that the same larvae produce pit traps with different sort of angles. We also think...
So substrate dependent on the pitch of the trap?
Yes, yeah. It's dependent on the substrate, and also the larvae manipulate the material in a way that the traps have a smaller angle than the maximum angle of that material. You know, if you grab sand and you just throw it on this table, it will create a little mound on its own. Well, antlion larvae do that, and they do it a little bit. They modify the angle further. We think precisely for the efficiency of the trap. We saw that if the traps were built with coarse soil, they had a different angle and they were less efficient. If an ant is walking around, the ant will be more likely to escape that type of soil. So that created also the situation in which these larvae were more likely to abandon that trap and move away.
Interesting, yeah. And this species, they spend the vast majority of their life in the larval stage, right?
Yes. They spend a long time as larvae. They go through different molds, and eventually when they become adults, both males and female emerge. They have wings, and they're not tremendously common across environments but when they come out, they have a very distinct shape as Neuroptera. They're in the insect group of Neuroptera, and then you see them flying around. You're like, what was that? Oh, I think it was a Neuroptera. That's kind of unique. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when they're in the adult stage, they only live for roughly a month, right?
Yes. They live for short periods of time. So this is common across these insect systems, this arthropod system, that the adult stages are very brief. Well, it varies, but frequently it's a very small percentage of their whole life cycle.
What would be a piece of advice you'd have for a young biologist trying to figure out what field of study to pursue?
For young biologists, I would say a few things. Just go out there. Go out there in nature, in whatever foreign nature is appealing to you. Could be water, could be land, could be mountains, could be deserts, could be the rainforest. Just connect with nature as much as possible. Your best ideas come up when you're out there. The most interesting questions, and my colleagues that have children, they frequently tell me, I bring my kids to the field to do a little hike out there, and those questions are really good. Their questions tend to be really good. So advice, go out there, keep your eyes and ears open for those things. And then in the process of doing science, remember that, on the day-to-day, how does your day-to-day of a scientist would look? and follow that career path. Sometimes we're interested in the evolution of eye system in cephalopods. But if you wanna, and that involves doing a lot of genomic and wet lab work, if that's what you want, go for it. But if you really wanna just hang out with squid and octopuses, just do behavior or do physiology or something like that. Mm-hmm. So learning, doing research on how your day-to-day will look is very important. And also these days, be prepared for defending science at any stage of funding, of policy, of education, and also plan ahead for what the next stages will be. I tell my grad students on the first day of the semester as they start their program, it's never too early to start looking at the job market, what we as basic scientists can contribute to society and how we can make a living and a career out of it. Is not necessarily straightforward, and sometimes it needs more time than we typically allocate to that.
How do you think AI is going to impact your research?
AI is becoming a great tool. It's impacting quantitative tools such as quantitative analysis, the coding. These days is somehow easier for people to ask AI platforms how to analyze data. So that is a very useful tool because it allows us to spend more time on actually doing the analysis or actually doing the work of thinking of the very good, important, and novel research questions. Another thing that in my field, the behavioral ecology and biomechanics, AI is becoming very important in streamlining data analysis. A lot of what we do, a lot of what I did as a grad student was doing videos of animals, and then I was like, yeah, eventually I'll get back to campus and I'll figure out how to analyze this, and it took way longer than I expected. So those tools are becoming easier to handle bigger loads of data. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were there any particular books that impacted your life?
Yeah. Scientifically, I remember earlier I mentioned Spiders in Ecological Webs by David Wise. It's a book from the early 80s of very elegant yet simple experiments of how two species of spiders that build an orb web, they build them in different heights. And typically we all assume that is competition avoidance. And then animals in different species will avoid competing with each other. And then the rest of the book is telling us how difficult it was to actually prove that idea. Chase that idea, do an experimental design to chase that idea, and sort of get a straightforward answer that somehow matched the straightforwardness of the prediction. And I do think that impacted my development as an early career scientist because it dives deep on how do we create assumptions and how do we test them, and how our previous notions of scientists and how things work, of science and how things work, somehow are not as smooth as we thought they would be.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the most controversial thing happening in your field of research currently?
Controversially in the fields of science that I work with, the development of AI tools, the development of quantitative tools, and I don't know how controversial this is, but there's a push between what's a model system and what's not. A lot of the knowledge that we have for animal behavior and even locomotion is derived from a limited amount of systems. So how generalizable movement, development, evolution of appendages is based on the knowledge of a handful, less than a dozen of species is, how generalizable it is, becomes a little contagious. No, not contagious, contagious.
Contentious.
Contentious, yeah. Thank you.
I noticed, are these flutes here?
Yes, yes.
Do you play?
No, that was a gift. They're flutes from the Andean region of central Colombia.
But you can't play.
No, I cannot play.
I was going to ask you to play.
Yeah. If only I knew that. It was a gift from a friend who does research in plant physiology in those areas, and he was here and brought me that.
What would you say is the hardest challenge that you've had to overcome in your life?
Hardest challenge I've had to overcome, I guess, a transition when I moved from Costa Rica to the US. Continue to being a scientist in a different region, in a different country, has been an interesting challenge, or was an interesting challenge. This happened, I moved to the US 11 years ago to pursue more academic opportunities. Just how, I guess this is a challenge that I still experience as a professor, how the educational and research systems are somehow different. Fundamental things such as the undergrad curriculum, for which classes students with the biology degree have taken, is somehow very different in the areas where I've been. And you know, the opportunity of doing research based on funding, doing research without funding, doing still great research without funding or a lot of resources has been different. So I would say, yeah, a big challenge that I've had is somehow adjusting to a different academic, cultural context in which science happens differently. Even though we're somehow pursuing the same goals of understanding the natural world, the tools that we use, the methods that we use, and the training that we all have, either as students, technicians, scientists, professors, it's all very different.
How do you think your studies of these various animals, how do you think that has impacted your humanity?
Yeah, that's a good question. Impacted my humanity, I guess, just by trying to understand things, behaviors, and ecological processes that happen at a different scale that I'm used to, that has had a somehow impact on how I see the world, how world works differently at different scales, or even when I was studying tree hoppers, the fact that they communicate with vibration through the substrate, which is not something that we do as humans, or Opiliones using chemical signals to communicate, to reproduce. So that gives you somehow a different understanding of how the world works. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in the process of being engaged in research, collaborating with students, with postdocs, technicians, participating in the field classes, I think that has given me the great opportunity to interact and get to know people from different parts of the world with different cultures. So that somehow plays a big role in how you see your context as a scientist, coming from a given country, moving to another country, having had all these amazing, fundamentally life-changing opportunities that I've had, certainly puts me in a place that makes me see things differently.
Mm-hmm. What would you like your legacy to be?
I would like my legacy to be mostly in the realm of education. I guess I've had, we know of great scientists. Some of those great scientists are also great mentors and professors, and I've had tremendously great opportunities to still be doing science these days, and that has been thanks to all the people that have spent some or a lot of time teaching me and supporting my research, and I want to just pay that forward and contributing to the study of overlooked or traditionally overlooked groups of animals. Sometimes that could be also part of a legacy. I say that I I joke that I say that I study the behavioral ecology and biomechanics of animals through the lenses of ecology and evolution, which is true. But then I said, well, actually what I do is just I'm an ambassador of weird animals.
That's good. Is there a question or topic that you'd like to talk about that I didn't ask or cover?
We can talk about tropical environments. Yeah, so my research is mostly in animal behavior and ecology. I do teaching in the same sort of fields. In the process of doing science, a lot of my research happens in tropical regions, and tropical regions are impacted by a myriad of stressors and land use change and market pressures. So part of what I teach as a professor here on campus is tropical ecology, understanding not only how the tropical environments work, but also through the lenses of environmental sciences and how climate change and deforestation and the expansion of agriculture and cattle pose a big, potentially dooming future in all these environments, and how we as consumers, as people voting for representatives, can have a big impact in the future, not only of how these environments work and all the fauna and amazing charismatic animals, including these arthropods, in their future, and how it is also our duty to protect it. Yeah.
I think that's a good end point.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Ignacio, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This is very exciting. Yeah.
Great.
Cool.
Gracias.